All right, so welcome to another deep dive.
Mhm.
Today, we're going behind the scenes of a meeting that really could have reshaped global politics.
Yeah.
This is the tense encounter between then President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy
Right.
back in 2025.
Yeah.
And remember, at this point, the war in Ukraine is still raging on.
Right.
The whole world is kind of on edge,
Yep.
looking for any sign of like a resolution.
Absolutely.
But this is not your typical like diplomatic handshake and a photo op.
Yeah.
We are about to witness a clash of personalities, conflicting priorities,
Uh-huh.
and some seriously high stakes poker playing.
Definitely.
So are you ready to dive in?
I am.
Okay.
I think what makes this meeting so fascinating is that it's not just about the words that are being spoken.
Right.
It's about what those words reveal,
Yes.
about the power dynamics between these two leaders,
Mm-hmm.
the weight of global expectations,
Yeah.
and the very real human cost of this ongoing conflict.
Yeah. Absolutely. And right off the bat, Trump starts talking about this historical deal he's brokered
Right.
involving Ukrainian raw earth.
Hmm.
Those elements that are essential for all sorts of modern tech,
Yeah.
from smartphones to military hardware.
Mm-hmm.
He's painting this as a win-win,
Yeah.
saying it'll boost both economies
Right.
and even like revolutionize fields like AI and
Yeah.
weaponry.
And it's worth noting that securing access to these raw earth elements
Yes.
was a big strategic move for the U.S.
Right.
Especially since they lack substantial domestic sources.
Right.
Think about it. We're talking about the building blocks of modern technology.
Right.
And at this time, the U.S. was heavily reliant on other countries,
Yeah.
including China,
Uh-huh.
for these critical resources.
Right.
So Trump saw this deal as a way to reduce that dependence
Uh-huh.
and gain a competitive edge.
He definitely seems to enjoy being the deal maker,
Oh, yeah.
even going so far as to compare himself to figures like George Washington
Oh,
and
yeah.
Abraham Lincoln.
That's a classic example of how Trump frames himself
Right.
as a disruptor, a game changer.
Yeah.
By drawing those historical parallels,
Mhm.
he's aiming to cement his legacy as someone who reshaped the global landscape.
Yeah.
But amidst all this talk of grand deals and economic prosperity,
Right.
Zelenskyy brings us back to the harsh realities on the ground.
Yeah.
He's expresses gratitude for the U.S. support so far,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also very clear that Ukraine needs more,
Right.
especially air defense systems.
It almost feels like they're speaking two different languages.
Yeah.
Trump's focused on these long-term economic gains,
Right.
while Zelensky's laser focused on the immediate threat,
Yeah.
the daily struggle of the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
And he doesn't hold back when it comes to Putin,
No, he doesn't.
labeling him a killer and terrorist.
That stark contrast speaks volumes, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
On one side, you have Trump,
Yeah.
the self-proclaimed negotiator trying to orchestrate a grand bargain. That almost bypasses the immediate conflict.
Right.
On the other side, you have Zelenskyy,
Yeah.
the embattled leader,
Mhm.
fighting for his nation's survival
Mm.
and unwilling to even entertain the idea of compromise
Right.
with someone he sees as a war criminal.
And this difference in approach becomes even more apparent
Yes.
when a journalist asks about potential compromises Zelenskyy might have to make,
Yeah.
specifically regarding elections in those occupied territories.
Right.
And his response is powerful.
It is.
No compromises with a killer about our territories.
Hmm.
It's like he's saying, this isn't just about land.
Yeah.
It's about the soul of Ukraine. Its
Yeah.
right to exist.
Exactly. That statement goes beyond just the practicalities of negotiation.
Right.
It speaks to a moral conviction,
Uh-huh.
a refusal to be bullied by an aggressor,
Right.
and it raises a very important question.
Yeah.
Can you truly negotiate with someone who consistently breaks international norms and agreements? Remember, Zelenskyy argues that Putin has broken ceasefire agreements at least 25 times before this meeting.
Right.
So how do you even begin to establish trust or find common ground in that context?
And then there's the moment that everyone remembers
Oh, yeah.
Zelensky's choice of attire.
Yeah.
A journalist actually questions his decision not to wear a suit,
Right?
bringing up concerns about respecting the office.
Mm.
Zelensky's response is simple, but profound.
Powerful.
I will wear a costume when this war will finish.
This wasn't just about clothing.
Yeah.
It was a statement.
Yeah.
Think about it. Here's a leader who's literally fighting for his country's survival.
Uh-huh.
And he's not going to play dress up for a meeting.
Yeah.
It challenges our preconceived notions of what a wartime leader should look like,
Right.
how they should present themselves on the world stage.
I'm curious, though, about how this unconventional approach might have been perceived by different audiences.
Yeah?
Do you think it resonated with those who value action over formality? Or did it alienate those who expect a certain level of decorum from world leaders?
It's a great question. And honestly, I think it probably did both.
Right.
But I also think it speaks to Zelensky's willingness to break with tradition,
Yeah.
to challenge expectations, which we see throughout this meeting.
Right.
He's not afraid to show the world the raw reality
Yeah.
of what Ukraine is facing.
And that tension between pragmatism and appearances plays out in the next segment of the meeting, too.
Okay.
As the conversation shifts to military aid,
Yeah.
LNG terminals, and the role of Ukraine in European energy security.
This is where we see Ukraine's strategic importance come into focus.
Right.
We've already talked about the raw earth elements,
Right.
but now we're also talking about energy. Ukraine has the potential to be a major player
Yeah.
in helping Europe diversify its energy sources
Right.
and reduce its dependence on Russian gas.
But even as Trump confirms continued military aid for Ukraine, he makes it clear that he expects Europe to step up and contribute more to its own defense.
Right.
This feels like a continuation of his America First approach, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trump consistently argued that European allies weren't pulling their weight financially and militarily,
Yeah.
and he pushed them to take on a more active role in their own security.
Right.
It was a point of contention throughout his presidency.
Great.
And we see it resurface here in this meeting.
Then things take an interesting turn when the topic of a potential trilateral summit between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin comes up.
Remember, this is a time when the animosity between Zelensky and Putin is palpable.
Right.
And Trump even acknowledges it.
Yeah.
But Zelensky makes it clear that he sees any negotiations primarily as a matter for Ukraine and Russia, not the U.S.
Right.
He's basically saying, this is our fight, our land, our future.
Right.
We'll decide how to proceed.
Right.
It's a powerful assertion of Ukraine's agency and a refusal to be treated as a pawn in a larger geopolitical game.
Exactly. Zelensky is pushing back against the idea
Yeah.
that the conflict is simply a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia.
Right.
He's emphasizing that this is about Ukrainian lives and sovereignty, not just abstract geopolitical chess moves.
And that leads us to what might be the most controversial aspect of this meeting.
Before we get into that, though, I think we need to unpack something else that comes up.
Okay.
Concerns about censorship in Ukraine and pressure on American companies to censor certain content.
This is where we see the complexity of U.S. support for Ukraine really come to the forefront.
Yeah.
On the one hand, there's a strong desire to help a democratic nation resist authoritarian aggression. But on the other hand, there are concerns about upholding those very democratic values, things like freedom of speech,
Right.
even in a wartime context.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It is.
And we see that reflected in the responses from Trump
Yeah.
and others in the room, like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio.
Right.
They acknowledge the concerns about censorship
Yeah.
while also emphasizing the importance of free speech for Americans.
It's a reminder that even the most straightforward alliances involve difficult trade-offs
Right.
and competing priorities.
Right.
Supporting a country at war doesn't mean turning a blind eye to potential issues or downplaying the importance of universal values.
So before we get to the dramatic ending of this meeting, let's dive into that controversial aspect we mentioned earlier, the discussion about Ukraine's internal policies and how those policies intersect with American concerns about freedom of speech and religion.
Okay. This is where things get a bit more nuanced and honestly a bit uncomfortable.
Right.
The journalists start asking about reports of arrests
Yeah.
and pressure on certain groups within Ukraine, specifically those who hold certain religious beliefs
Right.
and have been critical of the government's wartime policies.
Right. It's a stark reminder that even in the midst of a fight for national survival,
Yeah.
internal divisions and debates about individual freedoms don't just disappear.
Right.
And it puts the U.S. in a tricky position, trying to support a democratic ally,
Yeah.
while also upholding universal values like freedom of religion and expression.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you balance the need for national unity and wartime security
Right.
with the protection of individual liberties,
Uh-huh.
especially when those liberties might be seen as undermining the war effort?
Yeah.
It's a question that has no easy answers.
Right.
And the meeting doesn't really offer any solutions.
But it does highlight the importance of acknowledging these tensions.
Yeah.
And having open and honest conversations about them,
Right.
even when it's difficult or politically inconvenient.
Absolutely.
And it reminds us that support for any country or cause shouldn't come at the expense of critical thinking or engaging with different perspectives.
I completely agree.
Okay.
Blind support without acknowledging the complexities and potential downsides can be dangerous.
Right.
It's crucial to stay informed and consider multiple viewpoints.
Okay.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the overall tone of this meeting.
Okay.
There's a palpable tension throughout, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
And it really comes to a head when a journalist describes Trump's approach as engaging in diplomacy,
Right.
contrasting it with the approaches of previous administrations.
That's where Zelenskyy really pushes back, and
Yeah.
you can almost feel the temperature in the room rising. He's clearly frustrated by what he sees as empty words and diplomatic posturing. While his country is suffering, he reminds everyone of Putin's history of broken promises
Right.
and the ongoing devastation in Ukraine.
It's a clash of styles, for sure.
Yeah.
Trump, the showman, the deal maker,
Right.
seems to relish the spotlight and the opportunity to position himself
Yeah.
as the strong man who can bring peace to the region. But Zelenskyy has seen firsthand what Putin's aggression looks like,
Right.
the human toll it's taken.
Yeah.
He's not interested in playing games.
Right.
He wants concrete action, real security guarantees,
Right.
not just promises.
And that frustration boils over into a pretty heated exchange,
It does.
with Trump demanding gratitude and respect, while Zelenskyy defends Ukraine's resilience and determination.
It's fascinating to watch this power dynamic play out,
It is.
especially with the cameras rolling.
It is, and I think it reveals a lot about how each leader views the world and their place in it.
Yeah.
Trump seems to approach this meeting with a transactional mindset.
Yeah.
We're providing you with support, so you owe us something in return.
Right.
But Zelenskyy isn't playing that game.
No.
He sees this as a fight for survival.
Yeah.
And he's not going to back down even in the face of pressure from the most powerful man in the world.
That moment where Trump repeatedly says Zelenskyy doesn't have the cards without U.S. support is particularly telling.
Right.
He's basically saying, look, you need us, so you better show some appreciation.
Yeah.
It feels like a power move, an attempt to put Zelenskyy in his place.
It certainly comes across that way.
Yeah.
Trump seems to be using this meeting as an opportunity to assert U.S. dominance and remind everyone who's really calling the shots.
Oh, yeah.
But to Zelenskyy's credit, he doesn't back down.
He doesn't.
Despite the fact that his country is incredibly vulnerable.
Right.
He holds his ground, refuses to be intimidated or manipulated.
It's a remarkable display of defiance considering the stakes.
It is.
He knows that Ukraine desperately needs that U.S. support,
Right.
but he's not willing to compromise his principles or his country's dignity just to appease Trump's ego.
And I think that defiance resonated with people around the world.
Yeah.
It made Zelenskyy a symbol of resistance against authoritarianism, a leader who refused to be bullied.
But this meeting isn't just about these two personalities clashing.
Right.
It also highlights the complexities of international diplomacy
Yeah.
and the challenges of navigating conflicting priorities.
Right.
We've already touched on the concerns about censorship
Right.
and the tension between supporting Ukraine while also upholding American values.
Right.
But there's another layer to this that we need to unpack.
Okay.
The abrupt and rather dramatic ending to this meeting.
This ending is as unconventional as Zelenskyy's attire. It almost feels staged, like something out of a reality TV show.
Well, with Trump, you never quite know where the performance ends and reality begins.
Fair point. But theatrics aside, what happens is this. Trump suddenly declares, "I think we've seen enough," makes a comment about it all being great television, and basically walks out. It's not exactly the diplomatic exit you'd expect after such a tense meeting.
The striking break from typical diplomatic protocols, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You rarely see that level of raw emotion, that bluntness in these high-stakes international encounters.
It's almost like he's trying to humiliate Zelenskyy on the world stage,
Yeah.
using this meeting as another opportunity to assert U.S. dominance.
And it definitely raises questions about whether Trump's approach, with all its unconventional tactics and power plays, ultimately helped or hindered Zelenskyy in Ukraine.
Right.
By publicly emphasizing Ukraine's dependence on the U.S. and undercutting Zelenskyy's authority, did he inadvertently give Putin more leverage.
It's a question worth considering. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways from this explosive encounter? What should we be reflecting on?
I think there are a few crucial points to highlight. First, this meeting really exposed the stark contrast between Trump's transactional view of foreign policy and Zelensky's unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. Trump seemed to approach the conflict as a business deal, a game of leverage and economic gain. Zelenskyy, on the other hand, was fighting for his nation's existence, unwilling to compromise on core principles.
It's almost like they were operating in different realities.
In a way, they were. And that brings us to the second takeaway, the complex and often contradictory nature of U.S. support for Ukraine. While there's genuine sympathy and a desire to help, there were also legitimate concerns about internal issues within Ukraine, the potential costs of deeper involvement, and the need to balance support with upholding American values.
It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned alliances can have unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And finally, I think this meeting underscored the power of individual leadership, for better or worse. Zelensky's defiance, his refusal to be bullied or treated as a supplicant, resonated with many around the world. His unconventional wartime leadership style, from his attire to his uncompromising stance, became a symbol of resistance against authoritarianism.
It's a powerful image, one that continues to inspire even years later. So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a final thought.
Imagine you're a global citizen watching this meeting unfold in real time. How do you interpret Zelensky's actions? Does his defiance inspire you? Or does it make you question his ability to navigate the complexities of international diplomacy? And did Trump's approach ultimately help or hurt Ukraine's position on the world stage? These are questions with no easy answers, but they're worth wrestling with as we continue to grapple with the legacy of this pivotal moment in history.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. This meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy was a defining event, one that had a lasting impact on the relationship between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia. And the questions we've raised today continue to resonate as we navigate the ever-evolving geopolitical landscape.